Well, school is back in session, kind of, and so we begin tonight with Omicron and education. It's been tough in some cities to get kids back to school this month, to get them there and keep them there. The White House is working to support COVID testing in K-12 schools. The plan is to increase the number of available tests by 10 million per month. The administration says it will distribute 5 million free rapid tests to schools each month. It will also let states with high infection rates request more from the CDC. Lab capacity will also be set aside for schools to support another 5 million PCR tests per month. And the federal government will deploy surge testing units as needed. All of this comes during a heated debate over in-person learning. Many schools across the country are pivoting back to remote classes. Cincinnati's public school system is shifting to remote learning until January 24th. Officials cite, quote, ongoing staffing shortages that are the result of increased COVID-19 in the community, unquote. In Indianapolis, public high schools and freestanding middle schools are going fully remote for the rest of this week. They hope to get back on campus about a week from now. Many students and teachers are understandably unhappy about how their schools are handling Omicron. Some are letting officials know it. Here in New York, a number of students walked out yesterday in protest. This video is from Brooklyn Technical High School. Yesterday, New York City schools reported nearly 9,000 COVID cases among students and staff. This was the scene outside schools in Windsor, Connecticut, that's just north of Hartford. Teachers wore black to protest the number of tests and masks available to them. It's safe to say that most parents and teachers want students back in the classroom to get the best education possible, but nobody wants anyone to get COVID. And figuring out how to move forward has sparked a lot of debates, especially between district leaders and union leaders. Meanwhile, in Georgia, school systems in and around Atlanta started the semester remotely. They've since transitioned back to in-person instruction. Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp eased COVID quarantine and contact tracing requirements in schools. In a letter to superintendents, the governor and his public health commissioner wrote, quote, students, parents, and educators have made it clear to us that they want to be in the classroom, unquote. They added that educators and staff may return to work following COVID exposure, regardless of vaccination status or the point of exposure. That's if their employer deems it necessary to ensure adequate staffing. Lisa Morgan is the president of the Georgia Association of Educators. Ms. Morgan, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me this evening.
What's your view of how teachers in Georgia are handling all of this right now between the Omicron variant, people having to jump into other roles, as we heard from the superintendent, jumping into other roles just to keep the doors open and the lights on? How are teachers in Georgia doing right now?
I have heard one word from teachers all across the state this year and other school staff, and that is exhausted. Beginning the year, teachers were feeling that stress and strain from a third school year impacted by the pandemic. The stress of trying to support our students socially, emotionally, as well as academically, and trying to keep them physically safe and healthy is really taking a toll on our educators.
The superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools has been asking for retired employees to consider stepping back in as substitute teachers. What about just the staff levels in schools right now, particularly with teachers who are either sick or some of whom may have walked away and said, I don't want to do this anymore? We know that this great resignation is affecting education just like every other industry.
It truly is, and at this point, staffing levels are a concern for a great many of our schools. I've been speaking with members across the state this week about the staffing levels and the availability of substitutes for educators who are sick or out for some other reason. And in many cases, substitutes are not available, and many of our retired educators who would have previously said, oh yes, I would love to go back in the classroom with students, are not willing to do so in the midst of a pandemic.
What's your sense of how some districts and unions have gone kind of head to head over the return to the classroom. And again, I don't want to draw too many comparisons between cities and states, but Chicago's been in the news for the last few days over the fight between the Chicago Teachers Union and Chicago Public Schools, and also with the city's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, in terms of the terms under which teachers would return to the classroom. School was closed for multiple days. Students are finally back on campus now. What about just that aspect of this, the labor relations piece of getting schools open again?
I think that's an aspect of this that, based on different situations that we have in different states, is vastly different here in Georgia. But I think there is one commonality for all educators, and that is that all educators want nothing more than they want to be in the classroom with our students. But we do have the responsibility to protect our students' physical safety, their health, their social and emotional well-being, as well as their academic well-being. And in this instance, with this pandemic, educators for the first time have stood up and said no. Always before educators, something needed to be done. We dig down, we dig into our own pocketbooks to ensure that our students get what they need. But with this pandemic, and particularly with Omicron being so much more contagious, you're not asking this time educators to put ourselves at risk. You're also asking us to put our families at risk, and our students and their families.
I wonder if I could get your reaction to the change that Governor Brian Kemp made that we mentioned earlier in terms of quarantining and contact tracing. You referred to this as a Hail Mary in an interview with U.S. News and World Report. What did you mean by that?
I think it's a Hail Mary attempt to ensure that we do have adequate staffing and that schools do not have to close because they do not have staff. We here in Georgia have been having record day after record day with new cases. The report today, we are averaging 2,545 children birth to 17 who are testing positive. That's the 7-day average. Educators are part of our communities, and we have schools and we have school systems that have had to close. And I think this was an attempt to say, if you are positive but not symptomatic, or if you've been exposed but not symptomatic, we want you to come to school so we have the person in the classroom. Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is when we bring in people who may be contagious, we are hastening the time that we have more and more people out.
I wonder what you see as the path forward through all of this. You know, you want people in the class, we need people in the classroom, want to keep kids safe. Remote education keeps them more distant from one another, but it pales in comparison to what teachers can do in person. What's the one biggest thing that you would like to see done, or that your organization would like to see done to mitigate all of this and to move forward from this before we go?
Since the beginning, I've said I'm a kindergarten teacher. I'm an expert in classroom instruction. I'm not the expert in public health. But the experts in public health of the CDC have told us what to do. And that is everyone in any school facility on our school bus should be wearing a mask at all times. We should be encouraging vaccination, social distancing as much as possible, improving the ventilation, teaching our students and practicing good hygiene. And if someone is sick or is a positive case, they should be staying at home.
Lisa Morgan, president of the Georgia Association of Educators. I appreciate you making time for us tonight, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.